For more, we're joined by Brian Katulis, his senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Middle East Institute. Brian, thanks so much for joining us this morning here on the show. I have to start by asking you, this suspension last week amounts to the first and probably the only suspension of military aid by the United States since the war started, October 7th. Can Israel, as Netanyahu vows, go it alone? And not just talking about Rafah here, because the IDF supply train is probably efficient. I'm asking you about down the road for the day after scenario as well, Brian.
No, Israel can't go it alone. And what we're seeing here is some pretty bad political theater, both in the United States and inside of Israel as well. And I understand why it captures the imagination of the media, because politicians make inflammatory remarks. But the reality is that the United States and Israel are still very much working together and on the same page. They both agree that Hamas needs to be eliminated as a security threat. They both work together, as we saw last month, to deal with threats from Iran and its networks around the region. So right now, what we're talking about is a very limited, slow in delivery of a particular type of weapon, a weapon that actually is quite deadly in urban areas. And we've got more noise than what makes it seem like there's more divisions between the United States and Israel. And I get why it's interesting, but it's actually avoids the reality that the United States and Israel are still working together to defeat Hamas. And the bigger divisions between the two countries actually relate more to questions like, should there be a state of Palestine, a Palestinian state created? Some of the longer term questions. This is, I think, more of a tactical and operational hiccup.
So, Brian, I wonder, what do you think prompted President Biden to issue this warning now, after 7 months and 35,000 Palestinians killed? And regarding the skepticism about the flexibility of Mr. Biden's red line, do you share that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot that's blurry here. And I think a lot, again, I would characterize as political theater. I think the reality here is that the Biden team was motivated mostly by the alarm that they have about the lack of a clear plan from Israel to keep civilians safe who are now in Rafah, who've taken refuge in Rafah. And we all know that Hamas has hidden itself behind these poor innocent people who've basically been used as human shields. Israel has one perspective on how to deal with that, and I think they're more casualty averse. They want to decrease naturally the number of soldiers they might lose in an operation. And the U.S. is essentially saying what happened in Khan Yunis and in other stages of this operation shouldn't really happen again, and it's against your interest to do this. That yes, we agree we should go after Hamas and its leadership, but that ultimately we can't afford to see another 35,000 or even more Palestinian civilians killed in the mission to try to eliminate Hamas.
And Brian, how badly will a Rafah offensive imperil ceasefire negotiations? I mean, we know that the delegations have left. The CIA director has also left Cairo.
Yeah, it's unclear to me that these 5 months of on-again, off-again negotiations, whether the negotiators, how close they really got. Because I think part of the problem is Hamas, which we should all remember started this war by attacking Israel on October 7th. Hamas has not been fully candid throughout this negotiation process about how many hostages it's had. It's actually increased its demands in recent weeks, and Israel actually has shown some flexibility here. Now, the challenge here is that anytime there's any division between the United States and Israel, my sense is that Hamas's position hardens. Anytime Hamas sees also dissent within the United States, where people are calling for a permanent ceasefire without placing demands on Hamas to disarm, they feel emboldened. So this could complicate things quite a lot. But my sense in the last week or two is that the negotiators were getting pretty close to a temporary ceasefire and a hostage release. And I hope that's still alive, but this could very well complicate that mission.
And Brian, I want to get your view on Mr. Biden's interview where he said, he pointed out that U.S. bombs sent to Israel killed civilians in Gaza. Just how much weight does this admission carry, and what potential consequences could stem from it?
Look, first, politically, I think it's important he said that, because one of the criticisms coming from parts of his own party is that Biden himself has simply not been empathetic or understanding to the plight of poor, innocent Palestinians who've been caught in the crosshairs. So that's, I think, an important statement. There's some reports coming out and difficult decisions the Biden administration needs to make about whether or not it will adhere to our own laws about weapons that we transfer to partners and allies like Israel, and if those weapons are used in a way that actually harms civilians. We have restrictions on that. Early in the conflict, people like Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor for Joe Biden, said that he was not going to play judge and jury on Israel's actions. Now we have a much different tone. And in part, I think it's, again, driven less about politics in the United States and more about a genuine concern about innocent Palestinians, some of whom I used to live in Gaza myself and work there back in the 1990s, some of whom just simply want some form of protection. They don't like Hamas, and they completely want the United States and other actors to help Israel restrain itself while Israel continues its campaign to eliminate Hamas.
Right. Brian, we know the United States is also hoping to forge a regional compact between Israel and Arab states, a process that began actually before October 7th with the Abraham Accords. How badly is that going to potentially be affected by a full-scale invasion of Rafah that could kill hundreds, possibly thousands of Palestinians?
Well, your question leads us to the answer that is correct, which is it won't happen. That broader deal simply won't happen so long as a major military offensive is underway, and including ones that harm actions that harm Palestinians. I was in Saudi Arabia just about a week and a half ago and met with some top leaders, and they've been pretty vocal in their criticisms of Israel's actions against Palestinian civilians. And they also have been vocal in their support for a creation of the Palestinian state. And that, again, I think, going back to a point I meant earlier, these divisions between the United States and Israel are kind of small when it comes to military operations. There's a slight difference here. The real division is the simple fact that the Biden team, along with many of our Arab allies, including Saudi Arabia, want to see a two-state solution. They want to see the creation of the state of Palestine. We have an Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu and many other ministers who flatly reject that. That's the bigger problem here. I mean, it's certainly a challenge. And if this Rafah military operation goes forward in a major way, meaning large numbers of bombs and large numbers of troops, then for sure nothing's going to happen on that broader deal.
Understood. We do have to leave it there, Brian. Thank you very much. Brian Katulis, a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Middle East Institute. Thank you very much, sir.